Welcome back to the channel, guys. Today we're going to talk about one of my favorite smallmouth bass fishing lures that I have been throwing a ton recently, and it's even started to become one of my favorite largemouth lures for up here in our Northeast lakes as well, solely because of the versatility and what it allows me to do. That lure we're going to go over today is going to be the Megabass Dark Sleeper. So let's cover everything you need to know about this bait, where to throw it, how to fish it, what kind of gear you need to throw it on, and you'll be catching more fish in no time, especially some giant smallmouth bass on this bait right here. So the Megabass Dark Sleeper has been a bait that's been out for a while now. They actually have the new Megabass Sleeper Gill, which is a version of this in bluegill form, but this bait has even imitated bluegills and other small bait fish for a while now, and we'll talk about that as we get into some of the color selection later. This bait is super effective. The number one way that I like to fish it is just using it as a football jig. So wherever you would throw a football jig, I would throw this, especially on Great Lakes smallmouth, other places where those smallmouth get on rock piles. This bait is insanely effective on those types of areas, but this bait can do more than that. You can fish it like a swim bait, you can drag it like a jig, you can hop it along the bottom, you can do all kinds of stuff with it. The ways that I like to fish it the most are dragging it like a football jig, or swimming it along the rocks down on the bottom. But one new way I've really started fishing this bait is actually fishing weed lines up here on the Northeast lakes. We have a lot of lakes that grow weeds. Out in the summertime, they'll get out to like 8, 10, 12 foot of water. They'll grow to the surface, and then there'll be a tapered edge down along the bottom. Not a lot of baits can get through that, solely because it's still a weedy area down there. This bait has that protector up top, and you can actually fish this over the top of that fringe weed line that's out just a little bit deeper. And the color selection allows you to choose different baits to imitate different forage that could be down there on that weed line. So it's been super effective for smallmouth and largemouth. You can even fish docks with this bait. You can do so much with it, but it's particularly effective for smallmouth, and we're going to talk about that in color selection 1 right here. Some sort of dark bait. So this one's black, a little bit of gold, some blue fleck in it. I have another one that's black with an orange belly and some stripes along the side. Those colors are going to imitate those darker bait fish that those smallmouth are feeding on. Specifically, the first one that comes to mind is gobies. This thing looks more like a goby than probably anything else. It's one of the number one ways that I like to fish this, and when that forage is around, it perfectly mimics a goby, especially the darker color patterns. But it can mimic other stuff as well. You can fish it in river systems with this darker color, and it'll look like some of those creek chubs, suckers, other types of bait fish that are down there on the bottom. Those smallmouth eat those. I've caught smallmouth before out of river systems that have thrown up small walleye that are about that long. This bait would imitate a small walleye perfectly. Smallmouth eat more stuff than we think, so this bait can imitate it all. That dark base is going to be my number one color choice for this bait. And that dark base just always works for smallmouth anytime they're feeding on those darker bait fish, natural type bait fish. And even the one with the orange belly can help imitate crawfish a little bit. It's not going to be the best crawfish imitator. I'd rather go with a jig at that point. But if you have it on, you don't know, oh, the fish feeding on suckers, gobies, crawfish. If you have that color on, it can really imitate all the things that these fish are feeding on, and you'll catch a bunch of fish. The second color that I really like to go with, this one's been my new favorite when I'm fishing those northern lakes, the weed lines, whether it's for smallmouth, whether it's for largemouth, both of those species will run that deeper weed line. It's this like bluegill color here. Don't even know what it's called, to be honest. I don't even have any in the package. They're all out. Has a little orange chin, some orange up on the face, olive green back, a little bit of blue in it. This thing mimics small bluegills so good down on those deep weed lines, but it can also do a really good job of imitating little baby perch. They'll have like that darker green back and a little orange belly, and they're kind of a clearish white color. This can imitate a little baby perch excellent. So those types of forage, I would like to go with this color. Usually I'm fishing it around some deeper weed lines. This isn't the one that I would really throw in those rocky areas. I'd throw it more on the deeper weed lines, drag it like a football jig, work it through those grass edges, reel it slowly over the top of it down there. You could do a whole bunch of stuff, but overall fish love to eat small perch and bluegills out on those deeper weed lines. this does an excellent job of imitating that. And then the last one that I do not throw as much, but I always have it with me just in case. I've used it for bed fishing purposes, but it also works if the fish are feeding on shad or other bait fish, is just this white color right here. White with a little chartreuse line down the side. You can use this where largemouth are feeding. I think this would be excellent for like ledge fishing on some of those places where you're throwing a deep diving crankbait or something like that, but they're not chasing baits, but you can catch them on like a football jig potentially. If you drag this in the same places where you drag a football jig, but the fish are feeding on bait fish, you might get some extra bites throwing this bait along. Like I said, this is the one I probably throw maybe like 5% of the time. Typically, I'm going with either the black base or that bluegill color, and that's going to cover everything I need, whether the fish are feeding bluegills and perch or crawfish, suckers, and gobies. That's what I'm making my decision on. That's what this bait imitates best, so that is why I'm going to choose those two colors and occasionally throw this one for specialty purposes. And then the last thing to talk about with selecting your dark sleeper is going to be your size. Now they make a bunch of sizes on this bait. It used to just be a 3/8 and a half ounce, I believe. Now I think they have a 3/8, a half, a 3/4. They might even have a 1 ounce now. So it all depends on where you're fishing, how deep you're fishing. My number one size, if you're just getting a couple of these to try, I would strongly recommend going with the 1/2 ounce. You want to keep this bait on the bottom as much as you can. 1/2 ounce seems like a lot, but it's an internal weight, and this bait has a lot of density to it, so it kind of sinks a little slower than you would think with like a 1/2 ounce football jig or something like that. It lifts up off the bottom a little bit more too because of how fat the head is. So I like the 1/2 ounce. The 3/8 works really well too if you're fishing like, say, maybe less than 8 or even 5 foot of water if you're fishing this really shallow. But I could even get away with the 1/2 ounce in places like that. 3/4 and 1 ounce, that's going to be when you're fishing some really deep water, 20 foot, somewhere way out there, when you really need to keep that thing down. And like I said, you want to keep this bait on the bottom. The more you can keep this on the bottom, the better you're going to do. You're going to catch more fish. So the 1/2 ounce is probably my number one starting point. If I had to, I'd grab 3 of these, one in a black, one in a bluegill color, one in a white. You'd be set. Those are the only 3 ones you need to get started, see if you like this bait, start catching some fish on it. And the last thing with fishing this dark sleeper for equipment wise, we're going to talk about your rod and reel combo. This isn't as important. I keep it very simple with this setup here. I literally just have a 7:1 gear ratio reel spooled up with 15-pound test fluorocarbon. And then I have my football jig rod or my flipping jig rod or whatever kind of jig rod you have. That's what I would recommend using. Treat this bait as a jig and you'll have a lot more success with it. So this is a 7'3" medium heavy. You could go to a 7'3" heavy or a 7'6" medium heavy or something like that if you like to fish a football jig with that. I like a little bit shorter rod with this technique just because sometimes I'll be pitching it at different weed lines, or I might be skipping it around docks or throwing it around some shallow cover. So that helps a little bit more than going with maybe a 7'6" like you would with a football jig where you're literally going to throw that thing as far as you can and just drag it on the bottom. It's not really what I'm going to be doing with this bait as much. I do that sometimes, particularly on like Lake Erie. I'll cast to a certain rock pile and drag it on that. But other than that, I'll be targeting some more specific areas. So I like the little bit shorter rod, a little soft tip with some backbone. They have an open hook technically because there's not really a weed guard in place, but the dorsal fins act as a weed guard. Because of that, you're going to want a little bit of backbone to really set the hook on these fish and make sure you land them properly. I also like the 15-pound test because it keeps your bait down a little bit more. If you went to like 20 or even 17, it's a little bit thicker line and it'll keep a bow in your line rather than trying to get down to your bait. And when you go to reel it or drag it, it'll make it lift a little bit easier than it would with 15-pound. It'll keep your bait on the bottom just a little bit better. You could even go down to 12-pound test, but I tried playing around with 12-pound a little bit and I broke off just a little bit too much. So I went with 15. It's a little bit sturdier of a line, but it doesn't give you the lift off the bottom, so it'll help you catch some more fish. So that's the setup there. Just a basic 7'3" medium heavy rod, some 15-pound test, and you're good to go. So I hope you guys enjoyed today's video talking about the Megabass Dark Sleeper. I've caught a bunch of big bass on this, and I promise, give it a shot. You might be impressed with how good this works on your local lake, even if it's not like the Great Lakes or something like that, or even if they just have largemouth. If you want to see another video right here where I talked about a new drop shot bait that catches a bunch of big smallmouth, go ahead and check that out. Hit that subscribe button down below. Thanks for watching.